It's unbelievable, really, how much wizards and wrestlers have in common. For example, both are going to want to figure out what style they are, and both are going to need a good tag team partner. Ooh, yeah. Hello there, everyone. Welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. And today, we're coming back to go over more of the first edition Pathfinder Wizard. Today, taking a look at some of the familiars and some of the arcane schools that you can specialize into. They do a lot to really diversify the wizard class all the way around and just give you a complete and total bevy of different options and abilities. But before we get into all of that, if you're new here to the channel, go on down there, hit the subscribe button, and become a regular member here at the Gamer's Den. Or if you've already gone on ahead and listed yourself on just such an incredible roster of legendary heroes, then go on down and hit the like button and share the video far and wide. But now we'll go ahead and dive into things here. And to kick things off, of course, we're going to take a look at familiars. And we're starting with the Green Sting Scorpion. This will give you a +4 initiative bonus. It has a decent armor class of 18, making it survivable. It also has a good dex score, and its poison sting can cause the sickened condition, which from level 1 through 7, before you pick up the improved familiar feat, that will actually be fairly useful all the way around if you really end up having to make use of that. So definitely something to keep in mind. And that initiative bonus is really the key part that you want this for here, because as a spellcaster, going first means unleashing some pretty potent powers, especially as you advance in level. Next is Skunk, which is still going to be a great option because it gives you a +2 bonus on fortitude saves, which are a weak save for you, and at those early levels that could be something you come across that you don't really have a whole lot of defenses for to begin with. And 2 times a day it has the musk spray to cause the nauseated and or the sickened condition and eliminate the scent ability from targets who have it. And that and or part is depending on if the target either passes or fails their fortitude save, because if they fail, they get nauseated and then later have the sickened condition. But if they succeed, then they're just stuck with sickened. So it's nice that it has a little kicker on there that still applies even in the event of a successful save. And then lastly, we have an example of something that's probably not going to work out great for most campaigns, and that's the Dolphin. This provides a +3 bonus to swim checks, which whoop-de-doo, and then it also has a swim speed of 60 feet and has the ability to hold its breath. The swim speed's about the only thing that's great there. I mean, the reason why the Dolphin just sucks is because most campaigns, you're not on large bodies of water that much for that significant amount of time to where this is going to be reliably useful to you. Unless you're already in an aquatic themed campaign, then a bonus to swim is going to be great. That swim speed is going to be useful everywhere all the time, and the ability to hold its breath is going to be awesome. You have a familiar that can potentially save your life if you fall into the water and are failing your swim checks. So in that instance, the Dolphin's great, but for most campaigns where you're just out in the wilderness, in caverns, scaling mountains, going to dwarf holes, in other cities, or just out in the fields and plains, it's not going to be useful for you. The Skunk and the Green Sting Scorpion or other creatures like it that give these bonuses will be. Now, for improved familiars, though, we go on to some really, really good options. And improved familiars are just going to be an improvement over most of the other options that you're going to have access to. First, we have the Lyrakian Azada. You need to be within 1 alignment step of chaotic good in order to even take this, but it has a decent armor class bonus at 16. Its size is tiny, making it pretty hideable and portable for you. Can remove exhaustion and fatigue, can use wands, has spell-like abilities, a special attack, and a fly speed of 80 feet with perfect maneuverability, and has the true speech ability, which, if you encounter a target that has a language that your character doesn't speak and you haven't really invested in linguistics all that much, this has you covered pretty well, because the Azada uses this, and then they can communicate and translate for you. So that is going to be absolutely fantastic. Next, though, we have the Imp, a particular kind of devil, a classic even. Has a decent armor class coming in at 17, is also tiny and can also use wands, and has their own suite of spell-like abilities. They have a special attack, a poison attack, and a fly speed of 50 feet with perfect maneuverability. It doesn't have quite as much as the Lyrakian does, but really the key here is that they can use wands and have spell-like abilities. The flying also is very helpful because it means that they can keep themselves out of reach of most opponents most times, and the fact that they're tiny is also going to help with their defense or their ability to hide. So improved familiars that fall along these lines, you're going to want to look at the ones that are able to use wands, because that's going to really do a lot to increase your output in any fight or any kind of encounter. Doesn't even have to be a fight for that matter. But now we go on from our familiar selections to the different arcane schools, and we are not going to be able to cover them all because in addition to the classic schools like Conjuration, Abjuration, Enchantment, Necromancy, Evocation, so on and so forth. Each of those has sub-schools. Even the Universalist has sub-schools. And that's before we even get to the Elemental schools. So there's a lot to cover, and we're not going to be able to hit it all today. But they all have abilities and bonuses that they can provide your wizard, and so it's a good idea to take a look at them and see which ones are going to be of a really good benefit to you. So, starting off, we have Abjuration. This is going to cover defensive spells and things like resistance. Speaking of which, you have an ability called Resistance. You gain Resistance 5 to an energy type of your choice, and that's changeable each day. At 11th level, this increases to a resistance of 10, and then an outright immunity at level 20. So that immunity at level 20, I mean, it would have been nice to have maybe 5 or 4 levels prior, level 15, level 16, but it's still nice to have. And most campaigns, you're probably not going to see it because most of them don't go up to level 20 unless you're already starting off at level 18 or making a level 20 character for an epic level campaign. But still, nice to have, and it's nice that this increases as you level. Then we have Protective Ward. This is a standard action to make a 10-foot protective ward centered on you that gives a +1 deflection bonus to armor class, increasing by 1 every 5 wizard levels, and it's usable 3 plus your intelligence modifier times a day. Now, this could be a lot better. First off, that 10-foot protective ward is not a whole lot of range for this to be beneficial to more than yourself, your familiar, maybe one other squishy character, but then that's 3 targets in a very relatively small area, making you a little bit more vulnerable to other area of effect attacks. You have resistance to help out with that if it's an elemental type, but still something to keep in mind. Also, it's a deflection bonus. That's probably the biggest point against it because that's going to cover rings of protection, rings that give a +1, +2, +3, 4, 5 deflection bonus to an armor class. Because they're both deflection type bonuses, they can't stack together. The better one is going to apply. So that's going to hurt a lot. The exception to this being if you are in a low magic campaign with incredibly rare magic items where even a +1 ring of protection is worth 10 times its weight in gold. That's when this ability is going to be useful. And then it's mainly there to prevent fights because you've got a deflection bonus. Other members of your party probably don't, so they're going to make good use of those rings in that instance. But then we end with energy absorption, which at 6th level when this kicks in for you, you're able to absorb 3 times your wizard level in energy for absorption per day. You apply immunity and resistances first, then use the points of your absorption ability. So the fact that this explicitly stacks all of those things together is really what helps to make this even better. So say you get hit with the fireball, you make your reflex save and you have the damage, and say you're 11th level, so you've taken 10 points of damage off of there, and there's 5 points left over. Well, instead of taking the 5 points of damage, it just goes into your energy absorption and you use 5 points of that, reducing it to 0 damage for you overall. So this is a nice ability to have on top of everything else. May not come up all the time, but it will come up, and it will prevent those extra few points of damage, and all of those are really precious for you, because remember, you only get a d6 for hit points, and if you go down, a significant portion of your party's offensive and defensive, utility abilities go offline. So keeping yourself alive is going to be paramount. But then we go on to a much better choice, and that's Conjuration. This is summoning monsters or summoning other magical effects under your iron will. And the first ability you get is Summoner's Charm. Increase summoning spell duration by a number of rounds equal to 1/2 your wizard level, minimum of 1, and the extend feat, a meta magic feat that is, doesn't double the increase. Now, it still doubles the duration of the spell, and then your increase applies on top of it. So the fact that it still stacks together is great, just doesn't get doubled along with everything else. At level 20, the duration of a summon monster spell becomes permanent. Now, it's a summon monster spell, meaning you have to pick one out, and if you decide to pick out a different summon monster spell to make permanent, then that switches up. And if you decide to use that particular selected summon monster spell twice, you don't get to have 2 monsters hanging around permanently. It swaps it out. It will swap it out right then and there. So those are all things to bear in mind. But even still, you can use that selected summon monster spell to have an extra body on the battlefield, and then when the fighting starts, you can use your other summon monster spells to bring more creatures onto the battlefield. It'll be a nightmare for your DM, but it's going to be great for you and your party. The next ability you get from this is Acid Dart. This is a 30-foot range touch attack, deals 1d6 plus 1 every 2 wizard levels of acid damage, and is usable 3 plus your intelligence modifier times a day, and explicitly ignores spell resistance. I saw a couple of guides like RPG Bot talking about this, and they said that it doesn't. I'm assuming that's from a previous iteration, or maybe a version of the rulebooks that didn't have that in place there. But according to the system reference document for 1st edition Pathfinder, this does ignore spell resistance, so I'd say rely on that, but it's worth checking with your DM as well. But the fact that this ignores spell resistance, even though the damage is kinda low, means that even at mid-levels, this is still going to have some use for you, so it's definitely great to have in your back pocket. And lastly, you have Dimensional Steps, which probably could be rated higher, but it kicks in at 8th level, and it's a standard action to use this to teleport up to 30 feet per wizard level. You can bring willing creatures, but use equal distance for them. So what that means is, if you have an ally next to you and you decide you're going to move 20 feet away, well, you've burned 20 feet of movement for yourself and also have to use another 20 feet of movement for the willing ally to move with you. And the fact that this takes a standard action to use is also not great, because it means you are disrupting your own action economy and the spells that you're able to put out. But if it's a dire situation where you really need to get away from whatever's near you and you want to bring your familiar, another ally with you, then this is great to have right there for you. Definitely worth keeping in mind. Next, we have another good choice, surprisingly, even though I admitted that my thoughts on Evocation have changed. It's the Evocation School. This lets you project destructive magics. First ability is Intense Spells. Apply 1/2 your wizard level to evocation spells that deal hit point damage. This applies only once, not per missile or ray, etc., things like that. So if you use magic missile, you get that additional damage on top of it just once, not on a per missile basis. At 20th level, you roll twice and take the better result for spell penetration when casting evocation spells, which is going to help that damage get through really, really nicely. Though there is something to mention here with area of effect spells, with how this is written, and I haven't seen a whole lot of consistent clarification on this. If you use Fireball and you hit 3 targets, does the additional damage apply to one target, all the targets, or is it spread amongst your targets? The way I read it, I would say you roll the damage dice, they get to roll their reflex saves, and then have all of that, and so you determine the damage there, and you have this additional damage on top of it. So you roll your dice, you apply your additional damage, they get their reflex saves, and that's that. But I can see the wiggle room here for some DMs to say it's one of the other options, so check with them ahead of time just to make sure you're rolling things out the proper way for the table that you're playing at. The next ability is Force Missile, which is usable 3 plus your intelligence modifier times per day. It's a standard action to fire a Force Missile that automatically hits like Magic Missile. It deals 1d4 force damage plus your intense spell's effect. So that's another handy thing to have in place there. And also, because it's a force effect, there's really nothing that resists that out there. So this is going to be useful up into even the mid-levels, possibly even some of the higher levels, if you don't have a whole lot of other options in your back pocket. But still, Force Missile is going to be something that's useful for you throughout so much of the game. Then we have Elemental Wall. At 8th level, create a wall of energy, choosing acid, cold, electric, or fire damage. Shame that you can't have force or sonic in there. That lasts a number of rounds equal to your wizard level. Works like Wall of Fire otherwise, but the fact that you can select different elemental types means that you can affect a wider range of opponents that might otherwise be immune to the damage being done. And you just picture a wall of acid just constantly dealing damage, geysering up from the earth itself. I love visuals like that. But the sub-school for Evocation is going to be a big step up for you, and it does swap out some of the abilities for you, but you have Admixture. This replaces Force Missile and Elemental Wall. First is Versatile Evocation. Change the energy type of an evocation spell to another type, so acid, cold, electric, fire. Again, shame that sonic isn't an option in there, or force. But non-damaging effects don't change unless the new energy type invalidates them, and that's subject to DM discretion. And it's usable 3 plus your intelligence modifier times per day. So what's that mean? It could be invalidated. So say you're using Firestorm, for example. You're using Firestorm and it creates smoke, right? So it's a visual blocker there. If you change it over to ice, you could make an argument that, well, it's freezing and crystallizing the air, it's a sudden temperature change, so it's throwing up this billowing mist of icy clouds, and that's what's causing an obscuring effect for vision. And the DM could say, okay, yeah, I can see that still applying. But if it's changed over to electric damage, then it's not really going to produce any visual effects or visual blocking. Not really. Not something that's sustained anyways. So it's just something to bear in mind there, but even still, the fact that you can change the elemental type to deal different kinds of damage, even at a limited number times per day, that's still going to help you bypass a lot of immunities and resistances. Next is Elemental Manipulation. Kicking in at 8th level, you choose an energy type and another to turn it into if the first comes within a 30-foot radius aura that's emanating from you. Any magical energy from a caster level equal to or less than your wizard level is altered, including supernatural effects from creatures. So that wouldn't apply to, say, a fire elemental walking up and punching you, because that's just its fiery body. It's not really... It might be, certainly an incredible effect, but it's not a supernatural effect. A supernatural effect would be something more like a dragon's fiery breath, the dragon's fiery breath attack. If you select fire as the damage type, as the first damage type that you want to defend against, and convert it into cold damage because you have all this gear or spell effects on yourself that gives you all kinds of cold resistance, then the fire damage that comes at you, as soon as it hits that 30-foot radius aura, it starts converting to cold damage, and then all of your resistances apply in that instance. So this is an incredible defensive ability. So it's definitely something to bear in mind there. But also pay attention to the type of attacks that are coming your way, because this is specifically spells and supernatural effects, not anything else. And like I said, we're not scratching the surface on either of these subjects, because there's so much, and then there's still the effects of you still have to select opposition schools if you decide that you're going to pick, Evocation, Conjuration. If you pick admixture, you still have to look at, okay, so I went Evocation. Do I want to select Necromancy and Enchantment as my opposition schools? And those would probably be the two I recommend right off the bat there, because Evocation and Enchantment's got a lot of save or suck effects, a lot of will save things where you throw out a will save and bring the creature under your domination. And there are enough creatures, particularly at higher level, that are going to be immune to those kind of effects, like golems, for example. Would be immune to those kinds of effects. Lots of different kinds of undead are immune to those kinds of effects. And then necromancy. The necromancy spells, if I'm remembering right off the top of my head, you're not really missing out a whole lot on. And really all that means at the end of the day is that those consume the equivalent of 2 spell slots. So if there's something that from one of those schools that you really like, you're really just burning up 2 spell slots to cast that spell. It's not great, but look at the abilities that you're getting in return. I mean, you're getting some pretty incredible stuff depending on what you're selecting. And so definitely it's all things to bear in mind as you try to plan this all out. But, just go with what feels right for your character. But what do you think? Go on down to the comments below and let me know your thoughts. Did you like today's video? Did you dislike it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and what are some other schools you think are just really, really awesome all the way around? Like I said, I didn't get to cover them all, so there's plenty left to talk about or discuss. Like the Wood School, for example, out of the Elemental schools, has some amazing abilities. But with all that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your Master of Lore and Storyteller Extraordinaire. Thank you all so much for your time, and you all have yourselves a good night.